All right, we are back. This is the Lineup Podcast. I'm Dave Prodan here with my favorite co-host, Mitch Salazar. Event number 3 on the 2025 WSL Championship Tour season, the Mayo Rip Curl Pro Portugal, presented by Corona Cedo, has wrapped, and congratulations are in order for winners Caroline Marks and Iago Dora. We're going to talk all about that. But Mitch, you have been in Portugal for a couple of weeks. How are you feeling today now that the event has wrapped?
Yeah, pretty tired, Dave. I mean, a lot of ups and downs with this event. We had radical just weather, a couple of storms during the waiting period, and overall, my first time actually being here in person. So witnessing the event, seeing all the crowds on the beach, the food's been amazing. So there's a lot of key things. I got a Portuguese haircut, so I got a trim during the actual event too, which I thought was really cool. And trying to immerse yourself within the local culture is always something that I'm very appreciative of, and try to live as the people here do. And, overall, I thought it was a successful event. Some kind of different results, mixed ones, I would have to say personally. But we got 2 goofy-footed champs. Iago, as he said, first victory outside of Brazil, only his second one at the CT level. And of course, Caroline Marks, her best results so far this year, her first final and first win. She had 2 quarters before this, Dave, so a massive momentum builder for her, heading into a great stop in Central America.
Yeah, I mean, Europe, it's one of my favorite places on the planet, whether it's the southwest of France or Peniche in Portugal, Spain. The way the calendar is, it used to be in the European autumn. It used to be in late September, October, November, different time of year, but the tidal swings there and the weather, it is always a marathon at these events typically. But the European surfers, the European surf fans, the food, the culture, it is awesome. Let's get into it. Let's find out who we got down for winners and losers coming out of the Mayo Rip Curl Pro Portugal. Mitch, you start with your first loser.
Yeah, well, an excellent segue right there. You talked about the tides. You talked about the kind of different weather conditions and patterns. To me, the biggest loser definitely has to be the weather we had during this event. What's so funny right now? We're only a day off of the actual finish. It's beautiful and sunny outside right now, and that's supposed to be the weather for the entire week after. And we had beautiful weather the 2 days that we got here right before the event started too. But that's surfing, man. And, as Darren Hanley always says, wind, tide, and of course, waves don't wait for anybody. And we saw that during this event right here. We had to take opportunities at every single given moment to put the surfers out there in the lineup. And of course, we saw some people have to lose in tough conditions when it changed literally 20 minutes before we called the comp off. So that's the difficulty of being here in the Atlantic Ocean. It's much more unpredictable than the Pacific, Dave, but overall, once again, very successful one.
Yeah, it's like the endless summer adage, you should have been here yesterday kind of thing. Yeah. It's also, you should have been here tomorrow. I think that happens for surfers, whether you run contests or not. But yeah, one of the challenges in Europe, and related for my first loser, which was, first loser is anyone who enjoys events to run, bang, 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 back to back. I mentioned it before. I love Portugal. I love Peniche. It is one of the best places I've ever been to go and to surf myself. There are so many options. You can optimize the tide, the swell direction, the wind direction, especially in Peniche. It's such a narrow peninsula, and there's all these little nooks and crannies, and everything's kind of a short drive, and you can always kind of find waves to yourself. You can always find a sandbar. So I think it's one of the best events to work at because of all the options you have to surf yourself. But between those big tide swings, the winter weather, now that we're running sort of in March, and those ever-changing conditions, it's a really tough event to run. I think we almost probably maxed out the window this year. I think we finished just a day before the window finished. We had that big gap in the middle to account for the weather. And even thinking back when we used to run this event in autumn, I think it was the year Adriano de Souza won. So it was 2011, and it was just 3 days. We ran from dawn till dusk. Wow. We actually ran extra long days. I think we had a lay day on day 1. And then we ran days 2, 3, and 4 and completed the whole event. It pumped every hour basically. And that's the only time I've ever seen it run back to back. So it is a tough one if you kind of want to have that concentrated focus and momentum for.
Well, and that's the whole reason we have a waiting period, right? Because yourself included, 20 plus years ago, you came from the QS as well. Even though you didn't compete, you were still working those events and covering all of them. And on the QS, we got to run regardless of how it is. I mean, somebody might, get blown away by the wind or something like that. There could be a mist peak down the beach, but we don't have the permit for that area of the beach either. So like, you just got to do what's best with what's in front of you. And I feel like we saw that from a lot of young up and coming surfers. We didn't necessarily see that too much from the veterans, who are my second losers in this event, Dave. Both on the men's and women's side, I feel like a lot of people kind of missed out on an opportunity right here, as you said, because this is a historical piece of surfing right now. 16 years since we've had the search in 2009. So a valuable momentum shifter for a lot of people that have been here and done that already. It just seems like a new class of surfers coming up has really stood out, and they've adjusted and adapted to quick situations and changing situations too, Dave. Once again, like the fact that you have to be on hold, wait a little bit, then be prepared immediately after, like that just goes to show you that these kids out there right now, they're really doing their job in preparation right before the event starts.
It's a good one. It's all, you could kind of see it both ways too, right? Like on the veteran side, to your other point about the QS is like, you're on a schedule, you're definitely surfing at 9:00, like rain, wind or shine, right? I definitely screwed that up. But my point being is, I mean, I remember hearing this from Brett Simpson years ago where he said, surfing on the QS, or what would have been the CS at that time, he goes, there's actually a big advantage for an athlete because you can kind of like program out your prep and go, okay, I need to be peaking physically and psychologically at 10:20 a.m. on Wednesday because that's when my heat is. On the CT, as we know, it's different because we're trying to maximize the best possible conditions of the window. So you would think on the one hand, the veterans would have a little bit of an advantage because they've been through that. And it's like, okay, I know how to prepare myself. I know how to stay ready. But then on the other hand, I think just we had that huge gap between events 2 and 3. It was one of those events where it was start, stop, we're going to run here, we're going to run there, it's this tide, that tide. Conditions this year were probably a little bit closer to like QS, CS, so it's almost like a wash in terms of like, well, who has the advantage, the veterans or the rookies? And because it's a wash, to me, your point comes true, which it's like this rookie class may have something special to it if they're kind of breaking through in 3 events. But good one on the tour veterans. We'll definitely see if that changes over the next 4 event run here. My second loser, actually the American men, which you could argue extends well outside the surfing world in 2025, but that's a conversation for another podcast. Are there any mainland American men in the top 5? No. Top 10? No. Top 15? Also no. San Diego's Jake Marshall is currently leading the male charge for the red, white, and blue, and he's at 16th right now. Griffin Colapinto and Cole Hausman, they're at 20th and 22nd respectively. Crosby's been injured. He's down at 34th. So just as a start, kind of anemic numbers on tour at the moment for this group. And those numbers aren't exactly bolting out of the gates in 2025. So what's going on here, Mitch?
It's actually an excellent point you make right there. I thought Griff surfed an incredible heat against Marco. Marco just surfed the best heat of his life right there at that point, and Griffin had won 2 out of the last 3 events we had run here. So he was really the guy to beat. Of course, Phil has made multiple finals. He's won here in the past, but when it comes to recency bias, Griffin was the one person on top of everybody else, and I honestly don't know what it's attributed to. I feel like how she's surfing better than ever. I saw him during the free surfs. He was easily one of the standouts. You could just see by the scores that Griffin was posting, he has a connection with this wave. I thought Crosby surfed great in the opening round too. Eventually, I think the waves just didn't allow him to really kind of perform the way he allowed or
tough
wanted
way to go out for him. It was like real roulette.
And that's the point I was talking about the weather, because those were the heats where people lost when literally in a span of minutes, everything went from kind of pumping to real bad real quick and dangerous too. So
yeah.
Especially considering that he had the elbow injury at pipe, like there's a lot of factors that go through your head and you're probably overthinking things just a bit more. Jake had one of the most consistent years I've ever seen out of anybody on the championship tour last year. Only lost before the round of 16 once, which is nothing short of amazing. Overall, I feel like there's a lot more to give. I'd even put Alan Cleveland Jr. in there too, just because he is from the North American region.
Sure.
Look, you talked about it in our text thread earlier this week. A lot of people, if they don't get going in the next 2 events, there's just not enough room to really leave right there heading into WA, where people are just going to have to base themselves off of one result. So I personally like, of course, I think most people like that the cut got extended to 7 events rather than just 5.
Yeah.
But once again, that doesn't guarantee you that you're going to have more leeway just to play around a little bit more. No, you still got to get to work. And that's why I credit Canoa, all these guys, the experienced dudes that know how to win those close heats. And they know what it takes to be able to do that. And you know who also knows who it takes to be able to do that? I mean, my third loser, and it's a pretty obvious one, are the people that doubted the Mayhem team because they had a major bounce back at this event right here. They are so far ahead in the Vissla CT Shaper rankings after 3 stops. Get a bounce back event over there in Abu Dhabi, but they got 2 champions out of this one, and they had the 2 women's finals. 3 out of the 4 surfers in the women's semis, Dave, were Mayhem team riders. That's ridiculous. When we look at the field that we have right now on the women's side, I feel like they're going to be really, really tough to beat in the next few events.
Yeah, and I mean, we'll get to it in the next segment on the Vissla CT Shaper rankings. But as we pointed out, like, you know, the Colapinto brothers didn't show up with results. Like, Cole didn't get a result. Like, the construction of that team is really impressive because it's not like they're relying on a couple of, you know, apex predators to get all the results. Like, it's very well balanced, but we'll talk more about that in a minute. My third and final loser coming out of Portugal, I'm going to point the finger at myself here for a minute. I did not like, I mentioned it before, that 4-week gap between Surf Abu Dhabi and Peniche in the calendar. Of course, there are a ton of reasons that the scheduling team, which I sit on, we have to deal with, right? There's permitting, there's religious holidays, there's sponsors, there's operational logistics, etc. That said, it just felt kind of like too big a break between CT2 and CT3. And I wonder if that, plus what we've been talking about, the weather challenges in Portugal this year, disrupted surfer momentum, disrupted audience momentum, etc. So, you know, something to consider in the future. The good news, though, is that we now have 6 events in the next 3 months. We get 2 events per month. So we'll have plenty of momentum building opportunities coming up here starting in April.
Can I pick your brain real quick, Dave?
Hit me.
You know, I was talking to Jesse Mendez, one of our co-workers and an awesome guy, great surfer, obviously been on the CT for a couple of years. And he said that he likes this time of the year better here in Portugal for Super Tools rather than in October. And, you know, I think the weather to me was the really one thing that stood out when I got here. But I don't know about you. I feel like the quality of the waves could be just as good in October and the weather's nicer.
It's tough. I mean, that was when we inverted the calendar, even before that, like when we would go there in the autumn and we'd have those years where Super Tubos isn't firing for 3 days straight. It's not 2011. Like, we're moving to Moilest, we're moving to Legide, we're moving to Belgas, we're moving all of those options right around that peninsula. And, you know, we are maxing out the window. We're taking advantage of every different wind change, every different tide change. We would consistently hear, it's like, well, actually, winter is the season here. Winter is where you get like the consistent offshores and this and that. And I don't think that's borne out necessarily. It feels like pretty similar in terms of like, we'll have some challenging conditions this season. We'll have some challenging conditions that season. That said, I think it is warmer in autumn. But I mean, we saw it, you know, a couple days before the window started. It looked like classic Super Tubos from dawn till dusk. It was offshore. People were getting huge pits. So I just think that's surfing. Like, you need to do the best you can to organize the calendar in windows where you're going to get the best possible waves with all the other variables and you know, roll the dice.
And I think the same thing could be said for our next stop too, because you know, first time we're having the event at Punta Roca in April rather than in June, where, you know, the weather could be a bit more different. You're probably seeing a lot more tropical activity with storms, and right now it's still the dry season. But you could get, and you know, knock on wood, looking at the early forecast, like it seems like there should be a good early south swell, which is an excellent indicator of what we should be seeing, you know, for both the men and the women over there in Central America. Transitioning to my winners. A pretty easy one, obviously. The Goofy Footers, they dominated out here this year, and I'm super stoked to see it just because this is a complicated wave, Dave. And Italo's been very consistent right here. His style of surfing fits this wave in particular very well. Going right, going left, in the air, in the barrel. And of course, how good he manages his speed is something that really shines. Iago, of course, getting his best result here, his first victory outside of Brazil. I thought it was major. His creativity played another big factor. Caroline Marks, Aaron Brooks, consistent surfing, fast surfing too. And I want to give a shout out to, you know, a couple of guys that still didn't necessarily get those results. I thought they had a couple real good waves during the free surfs and in the contest. Connor O'Leary, Cole Houshman, and of course, I thought Jackson Bunch is still surfing better than ever. To me, he's going to be pivotal in this back end before the cut. And, seeing the talent that we have nowadays right now on the Championship Tour, especially those young goofy-footed surfers on the men's side, I'm excited to see what happens, especially over there in the Australian leg where most of them are competing for the first time, Dave.
Yeah, mind meld for me. My first winter coming out of Portugal was the Goofies as well. It's our time, Mitch. We finally got a little moment in the sun. But you mentioned it, both men's finalists in Italo Ferreira and eventual winner Iago Dora. Got the women's winner in Caroline Marks, women's semifinalist in Aaron Brooks. Goofies are having a little moment, and we don't even have Gabriel Medina nor Ryan Callanan with us at present because they're both injured. You got Vahine Fierro, she's simmering on the women's side. You got Miguel, Ian, Jackson, Connor, Cole. You mentioned them on the men's side. So I think we should kind of bask in this moment. As for the next few events, we've got Punta Roca, Bells Beach, Snapper Rocks, and Margaret River. It is backhand time for them. So we'll take a moment to kind of dap up the right foot forward crew. But yeah, my first winner is the same as yours.
Yeah, no, and I think there's just so much credibility when it comes to these guys and the women being adaptable and adjusting on the fly, because if you look at the calendar, and I don't know if you remember, but I think it was the first year we had the Challengers in Saquarema. Logie always comes down because he's in charge of the Challenger Series schedule. And we had him in the booth, Kaipo and I put him on the spot. I was like, hey, bro, when are we getting more lefts on tour? And it still hasn't happened. And, despite Fiji being over there at the finals now, I still think that there's a lot of room to grow. But that's always forced the goofy footers to have to perform well on right-handers.
Go on.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, poor Travis, he's like, yeah, no, it was a problem when I was on tour too. But I was gonna ask you, because the abundance of like world-class right-handers compared to world-class left-handers that have been on tour for decades at this point, I wonder if that trend has kind of colored how we view excellent forehand and backhand surfing. Because when I think of like agnostic of goofy natural footer, like the world's best backhand surfers, like I think of like Aki and Bobby Martinez, both goofy footers, because we see them go right all the time. And then when I think of like the world's best forehand surfers, it's like Mick Fanning, Joel Parkinson, Andy Irons, Kelly, everyone's going right is my point. And it's like, we're just kind of like, yeah, I like watching the natural footers on their forehand go right. I like watching the goofy footers on their backhand go right. And as we've seen, like surfers on their backhand, they can still easily win as well. So I just wonder if the conditions of the tour over the several decades have kind of lent itself to like, well, yeah, if you're going to perform, you have to be a good forehand natural footed surfer or a good backhand goofy footed surfer.
It's an excellent point, and it's just forced the goofy footers to have to be comparable to the regular footers and have a major point of difference, right, Dave? Because the regulars haven't been necessarily forced to do that on the backhand. I mean, when we had St. Louis for the Search in 2005, it was an all-regular footed final. You had Mick Fanning winning over Phil McDonald, and both of those guys were great going left. Don't get me wrong, but that's because the goofy footers still probably hadn't adjusted needing to go left at that point either, because they had only been going right for the majority of the time. CJ, Damien, as you said, Aki, Bobby Martinez, probably greatest backhand we've ever seen coming out of the United States. And, even Kelly I had to put up there too, because he's kind of the one guy that's always been super well balanced going either way. And of course in barrels too, but he's an outlier. That guy doesn't count. And if you look at the calendar and how we kind of could potentially set up, maybe Peru, maybe another part of South America, Chile, right before you head into Brazil, because it's a good season of waves. You get those south swells early on, and then it's an easy flight and an easy trek down there right afterwards.
No question. And it's just like, again, I'm overgeneralizing, so people are going to come for me in the comments and be like, Nick's backhand was excellent. I'm like, yeah, no, we're it's degrees here. But even the kind of backhand surfing you've seen over the course of the last couple decades between natural footers and goofy footers, like, because we've had more like longer point break, high performance right-handers on tour, it's a different kind of backhand surfing you're seeing from the goofy footers, typically compared to like a pipe or Teohopu or even like a ledging cloud break, where it's like ass in the wave for natural footers, like barrel riding backhand. It's just different backhand surfing as well. But I like your call on Peru. I'd love to go back there. But who have you got for your second winner, Mitch?
Yeah, props to all the men and women that really did everything they could to get this event together, and especially after that storm, the event organizers. Man,
Mm.
those guys, those men and women, they really worked their asses off, and to be able to see them pull off this event, especially with the amazing crowd we had on finals day, like Portuguese are a different breed. Definitely certain that not only is this going to be a staple for the event for many years to come, I just think that regardless if it's rain, shine, no swell, huge swell, there's always going to be people down there, and these organizers are going to make sure that this event is going to be up and running any single moment. And overall, my first experience in Portugal was amazing, but it really came down to having an excellent event. I feel like with the outcome that we had, especially with the two champions that came out of it, Dave, this is one of the best events I've ever been to personally.
It's a great call. Like a huge, huge congratulations to the event organizers. That stuff's not easy. And it's not just like the operations. It's not just the staffing or the catering or the security or the concessions. It's also just being able to have all that in place and being as nimble enough to take advantage of those windows. We had a
Yeah.
difficult forecast. We had difficult weather conditions. And to your point, it's like truly deserving winners, truly pick the eyes out of those 2 weeks or week and a half that we were there. So congratulations to the commissioner's office as well. My second winner coming out of Portugal are just the rookies in general. Like we have two on the women's side. We've got Canada's Erin Brooks and France's Vahine Fierro. They're sitting at 6th and 8th, respectively, on the women's rankings, both inside the cut line. On the men's side, you've got Australia's Joel Vaughan at 11th, Hawaii's Jackson Bunch at 15th, France's Marco Mignot at 18th, Australia's George Pitar at 19th. All currently post-event number 3, they're under the cut line as well. And then you got Al Cleland at 24th, you got Edgard Grosjean at 30th. They both have some work to do if they want to hang around. But 3 events in, and as we talked about, pretty varied venues in Pipeline, Surf Abu Dhabi, and Super Tubos. And you got 75% of the 2025 rookie class, they're currently sticking around for the whole season. So very early days, of course. But yeah, the rookies, they're my second big winner coming out of Portugal, and we'll see how they do over the next 4 events.
No, and those are true rookies too. People that have qualified for the very first time. And, even though Al and Grosjean aren't necessarily making the cut at the moment, Al had a lot of big moments right over there in Pipe. Of course, he beat former champion Jack Robinson, where Jack had a 10. Al got a 9.5 in that heat. Both here in Abu Dhabi haven't necessarily been good events, but once again, you're a standout on the free surfs, you're learning the wave, you come up against a veteran in Jordy Smith. It's a big dog to take down. Grosjean, once again, for some reason, I don't know if it's the seating or what the hell's going on, Dave. We need to have a talk with Renato. He's always in the first seat every single event. This guy needs to have a little bit of a break and not have to wake up at 5 every morning and be on the beach in the dark.
We'll nickname him the Canary. The Canary and the Edgard the Canary Grosjean just has to go out there and see if it's going to work or not every time.
Hey, but the 3 gentlemen that you mentioned though, Joel Vaughan, number 11, he's got 3 9s. Yeah. And I would argue that if he gets 2 more of those, he's easily making the cut. He looks great. He's competed very well, and he's kind of more known as a free surfer. His brother Huey was here during this event with him. Yeah. Father Vani as well. Jackson Bunch, I still think he's surfing amazing. Lost a close and tight heat right there. And of course, on the women's side, Brooks, best result so far as an actual CT surfer, because when she did win in Fiji, she was a wild card. You have Vahine right there. And I wanna mention that Marco Mignot, despite losing right there in the quarterfinals, when he came in and I talked to him, he was with Mickey Picone, longtime quick manager. He said, "Hey, I had my chance. I had the wave and the section. I didn't complete the maneuver. It was up to me." And that just goes to show that there's a lot of growth and a lot of introspective kind of thinking right there from a kid that's only been on tour for a couple of months. But he had an excellent back end of the year on the Challengers, made the final over there at the US Open, won the Challenger in Saquarema. I still think he's going to have a good run in the last few events before the cut line. And I was going to say that my third winner were the Portuguese fans. I really want to give it up to the surfers, all of them, because once again, this is an event that is so variable, and you had to go from a real short time period and time frame between Pipe and Abu Dhabi, and then you had basically almost a month to kind of think about how to prepare for this event right here. And once you get here, the waves are perfect, it's beautiful, sun is shining, And then the event starts and it's cold, it's dark, it's rainy. There's multiple different waves they could potentially surf, and just their adjustment overall. I had dinner with Canoa last night, and we talked about how grateful and how valuable living life on tour is, and that every day you wake up and you don't know what to expect, but that's what makes this so beautiful. And having that kind of ideology, I feel, goes a long way, especially for those new kids on the block. If they adopt that mentality, that's going to be a long and successful career for the majority of them, Dave.
It's a great point, and we're definitely going to dive into this in the upcoming segment. But my third winner, you mentioned it already, it's Lost Surfboards. Reigning two-time CT Shapers of the Year. They're back atop the rankings after what I would consider is a pretty slow start for them over the first two events. They, in Portugal, produced the crafts for both the men's and women's winners, the women's runner-up in an on-fire Gabby Bryan team lineup, as well as the women's semi-finalist in Erin Brooks. So very, very impressive for the San Clemente Baseboard Company. And yeah, we'll see if there's going to be an actual challenger for them in 2025, or if we might be looking at a three-peat, but we'll talk more about that in the upcoming segment. That is it for winners and losers coming out of the Mayo Rip Curl Pro Portugal, presented by Corona Cero. We're going to take a quick break to get a word in from our sponsors, and we'll be right back. All right, welcome back to the Lineup Podcast. I'm Dave Prodan here with Mitch Salazar. It's time to talk some surfboards. It is 3 events into the season. We're going to talk about the 2025 Vissla CT Shaper Rankings. Shaper Rankings! It's now into our 3rd year. Quick reminder for lineup listeners on how this works. It is a combined men's and women's ranking. We count all surfers that finish in the quarterfinals or better. The Shapers receive the same rankings point that correlate to their respective surfer finishes. The higher the surfer places, the more points that Shaper receives. We track the Vissla CT Shaper Rankings from Pipeline through Tahiti. And in addition to being crowned the 2025 CT Shaper of the Year at the WSL Awards, this year's winner will be gifted an overnight stay and surf at Surf Ranch Lemoore, courtesy of the Kelly Slater Surf Ranch, as well as the WSL. So, Mitch, we talked about it in the opening segment of winners and losers, but after a relatively slow start to the season, 2-time CT Shaper of the Year, Matt Biolas and the Lost Surfboard teams, they're back on top. They're back on top in a big way. What did you see on the ground just in terms of equipment? We had so many different conditions, different waves. What stood out to you in terms of what people were riding?
Yeah, especially that one day where things got big real quick. People had transitioned from a shortboard, which, primarily driver 3.0. You have the sub driver 2.0, which is, one of the best adaptable shortboards in the business by Matt Biolas and the Mayhem team. The step driver and the Whiplash, 2 very used boards once they got a little bit bigger. I believe Iago won on that yesterday, the step driver. And it's just basically a driver that's a little bit longer. The rocker tends to be a little bit more outlined just because of that extra length. And of course, a little bit more V in the tail because of that too. These boards work at this level due to the high performance surfing that we're seeing by both the men and the women. I do want to point out though that the fins specifically, we're seeing something on the future side where majority of the men's surfers were on the John Tech Flex. One of the most important and versatile fins I'd say on the market, Dave. And of course, with a punchy, powerful beach break like the one we see here in Super Tubos, it's really the perfect fin setup. Something that really just holds the rail a little bit longer, always fits in the pocket and turns real tight in the pocket too. And that's why John had a lot of success here over the years too, redefining that fin material over the last decade or so. Just want to point out though that I know that Mayhem is still dominating right now. Chris Borst is still right there due to Caitlin Simmer's success. He only has one surfer, and the guy's in the top 5. And that's why the Vissla CT Shaper rankings are so important. Once again, those people that DM me all the time, hey, it's not fair. The teams aren't structured well. Dude, Mayhem was really smart to open up the market in South America and in Brazil, and look at what it's done for him. When they got Iago Dora and really acquired a lot of those South American surfers, both on the QS, the CS, and of course on the Championship Tour, Dave, it opened up major opportunities for them. And once we started the Vissla CT Shaper rankings, it's obviously made a major impact. But Channel Island, same thing. Brisa Hennessy, she wants to get things going for them. They've been out of the picture the last 2 events, really. Bella Kenworthy got some points on the board for them. But Imai Deval, same thing. He kind of wants to get things going. He's been a pivotal and important part. I want to say congrats to Baron Mamiya. He's number 2 in the world right now, surfing for Channel Islands, really, really contending the way both of us thought he would in the last few years. best results outside of Hawaii so far, right here in Portugal. And I feel like he's going to be one to look out for over there in Punta Roca.
Yeah, it's a great point. I was going to bring up the tiered component to the Vissla CT Shaper Rankings. We actually had reigning women's world champion Katie Simmers post about Chris Boris being in the top 5 heading into Portugal, which I personally loved. He actually just got edged out slightly by another board builder who now has 2 surfers on his program, but primarily with the world number 1 Italo Ferreira, Timmy Patterson. Yeah. Timmy Patterson's cracked into the top 5 after Peniche. It is really interesting because I think in the last 2 seasons, what we saw were kind of those 3 tiers. You had the bigger programs that had 8 to 10 surfers in and around. You had sort of the middle-sized programs that were in the 4 to 6 range. And then you had the smaller programs that had 1 to 2 surfers. That's really shifted in year 3 where it's kind of moved into 2 tiers, right? You've got programs with like 1 or 2 or programs with like 6 or more. The middle class has gotten eradicated on the Vissla CT Shaper Rankings in year 3. Yeah, Mitch, I want to talk about board experimentation across the tour, but specifically at a venue like Peniche, because I am personally a huge fan of when we see the world's best surfers use slightly different equipment, competing against one another, the lines they can draw, whether it's, Dane Reynolds on the MTFA or, Chris Ward on the round nose fish at Snapper Rocks, things like that. I'd imagine, and I want to get your take on this too, at really hollow waves like your Teahopus, at your pipelines. I think in the past we've seen boards get a little bit shorter. We've seen the use of quads get enabled. And then at like high performance point breaks or like a lower trestles or Snapper Rocks, you've seen people experiment a little bit with outlines, a little bit more with maybe epoxies, etc. It feels like at a wildly different from minute to minute beach break like a Super Tubos, or especially this year, surfers tend to gravitate towards what they think works. I want to get your take on this because it feels like those kind of waves, like punchy beach breaks that are unpredictable, that's where you see maybe the least amount of experimentation in terms of tech, in terms of shape, in terms of fin setup. But what's your read on that?
Yeah, well, it's an excellent point because you want the old reliable at a spot like this, just because it's so unpredictable and it changes so much. But that being said, 2-time world champ Felipe Toledo, like, that guy was riding a quad, his trusty quad, which was a carbon board, by the way, with an EPS center. And, you wouldn't normally ride an epoxy given the conditions that we see out here, especially with so much wind. They tend to, really feel it a lot more, first of all. But then the quad is just something that he really likes to adjust to when it comes to managing his speed and potentially gaining more speed and control within the barrel riding experience. Unfortunately for him, that board broke in that quarterfinal appearance that he had. And against Jordy Smith, actually, in round 16. I had never seen a board get delaminated the way it did, eventually snap, and then the lamination went all the way through the traction pad, too. It was kind of scary the way it happened. Bounced back on the backup board, though, eventually defeated Jordy when, he let a wave go at the end, and Philippe made him pay. But this is one of those locations where I just feel you need to bring options. Gabby Bryan brought about 2 to 3 different board bags with 12 or 13 boards in them. And you just got to bring a ton of boards and leave them in your locker room. And next thing you know, there is a chance for you to surf in. Caroline Marks actually won on a board that she had ridden once before the event started. Seemed like it worked great. She eventually won the competition. And then, of course, Jack Robinson to me is a great person to look out for when it comes to these kind of stuff, too, because you look at how he had to surf, and he was at the top of the draw, right, Dave? Where that one big day, it goes from literally being 2 to 3 feet to all of a sudden being 2 to 3 times overhead. Has to paddle out on a synergy that's just slightly bigger. But that's one of those guys that likes to drop in underneath the lip line. So doesn't necessarily need to be paddling into a wave to be able to catch it that way, because the way he positions himself, especially as an excellent barrel rider, the way he is, he just wanted to drop in under the lip. And, personally, I'd be bringing 6 to 8 boards, depending on how many I could afford and how many board bags I could potentially bring. But that's just knowing that I can turn a larger board that's 2-3 inches longer just as well as any kind of short board. And that's how Cole Houshman operates. That's how Connor O'Leary operates. Those bigger dudes can handle that kind of energy and that power with their surfing. That's not everybody, though. And some people just need a little bit, more of length, a little bit extra width, or a little bit extra thickness just to be able to get into certain waves. And everybody's different in that sense, but it is a difficult location with what you're mentioning.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. And, on the topic of those smaller board programs, we talked about Timmy Patterson out of San Clemente. He's got Italo Ferreira. He's got Al Cleland. We talk about Chris Borst out of San Diego. They might be smaller programs, but they've got the two number ones in the world right now. They've got Italo Ferreira leading the men's side. They got Katie Simmers leading the women's side. So something to keep an eye on just on the intimacy component. I'd love to go back through history, specifically like the last 20 years, and kind of identify how common that is. I mean, you've obviously got Gabriel Medina with Johnny Cabianca. You've got both Tyler and John with John Pizell. Those aren't the big programs, but before that, you had Channel Islands, you had DHD, you had Jaya, you had all these sort of bigger programs that were producing the very top surfers in the world. But maybe in recent years, it's become more of an intimate kind of conversation with these elite level surfers and world champions and world title contenders. You mentioned that you had dinner with Canoa Igarashi last night, and eagle-eyed listeners had been pointing out that Canoa was on the verge of changing something up. He famously was with Channel Islands from when he was a very, very young surfer. He changed to Sharp Eye. He'd been with them for several years, produced awesome results. And he changed again in between the last time you and I spoke to now. He is with JS Surfboards. Did you guys talk about that at all?
We haven't actually had the chance to really get into it that much, but he did tell me, hey, dude, it was just a change that I felt I needed. Not that the other boards were stale.
Yeah.
I just felt like I needed to get my performances and kind of get my mojo back. Sometimes that's all that takes, and it can be a psychological thing. And of course, he knows what Jason's capable of with shaping amazing boards. Look at the people that currently ride for him and who's ridden for him in the past. We're talking about world champions, Andy, Bruce Irons, Joel Parkinson, Aki, of course, but I just think it comes down to your personal preference and how comfortable you feel on this kind of equipment, because just going back to the smaller labels, Tim Stamps only had one or two riders on tour. Sure. Brett Simpson, Courtney Conlog. Yep. Bill Johnson would take off surfboards. Also, CJ Hobgood for a good amount of time right there. And then, we always talk about Marcio and how small his program was before he really got Philippe. I remember getting a few boards off of him for a real cheap price, because a lot of Latin American guys used to ride them, and it used to be like, hey, where'd you get that board? Oh, it's a Sharp Eye. Marcio makes them. He lives in San Diego. He head over to the factory. It's a real small program. And then 2 years later, I email him to try to get some boards, and he's like, oh, yeah, this is the price now. And I was like, whoa, what happened? But, eventually you got more people you need to pay, a lot more employees. You need more distribution centers because your label is getting larger and larger. And this is the thing that stokes me out the most about the Vissla CT Shaper Rankings. Yes, we give credit to the one person on top that kind of made the label famous, but it trickles down to everybody. The Glassers, the Sanders, people that are involved in sales. Mike Riola from Catalyst and Mayhem was here, and we had lunch with him. And, he just talked about how Strider was actually a big part of that Mayhem program in the 90s and the kind of impact that Chucky Regano, all those guys made. Ryan Simmons when he was in charge of the surf team, and look at what they're at now. And I feel like that could happen for Timmy. Maybe he doesn't want that to happen. Jason definitely wanted it to happen. He opened up the label with the Pupo brothers over there in South America now. And, I'm just personally very grateful to see a lot of these people actually get the opportunity to create these boards under a certain label with their kind of infusion of cultural impact that they've seen over the years within their specific locations too. Those boards that Miggy and Sam have been riding lately from Jason Stevenson, they're being shaped by their father, Wagner. But it's a shape that Jason made himself over there in Australia. So what's the big difference? Maybe a little bit of taper here, knowing that this is what works for a little bit better for you, because I'm your father. I've been shaping for you for 30 years. Nobody knows you better than me. And those kind of small details go a long way when it comes to board building.
Yeah. I think that note on Canoa too is such a good one, because I've heard it since well before I even worked here, which it's like, oh man, why is this elite level surfer parting ways with their shaper? And yeah, sometimes it's because things don't work out, but so often because I think that the ocean's the most dynamic field to play in all of sports. It's like you get the surfer, it's like they know their ability, they know their approach, they know their athleticism, they know their equipment, and they're just like, well, I can't really tweak any of these things. There's nothing wrong with the equipment, but maybe I just need to see something different, right? Yeah. I just want to feel it's almost like there's nothing wrong. I'm just making a change for change's sake, and I just want to feel different. And you've seen it over history. And I would say that goes for, even civilian surfers too, that maybe they're on one board program forever. And it's like, it's not the boards aren't working. I want to feel something different. But Mitch, I'm curious, what are you riding at the moment? What have you been riding out in Portugal? And are those the boards that are coming to Punta Roca with you?
Yeah, I brought a Retro Tripper, which is a really fun, kind of versatile board. It has less rocker than, high performance shortboard, although it still works in any kind of conditions. It's perfect for here because it has a lot of volume, a lot more up in the nose too, so it's perfect for paddling. It's kind of it has like a round tail, but it's brought in right at the end too with the extra side wings. It's a thruster. I'm just riding, normal Mayhem fins in there, which are the largest, very versatile, adaptable fins. And then I also brought Cali Twin, which is the MR times Mayhem collaboration. Personally love it. It's always in my board bag anywhere I go because you always need a good twin fin in your arsenal. And for Punta Roca, I'm actually bringing the Cali Twin. I'm leaving the Retro Tripper at home because I have a few days in between events. I'm going to bring the Big Rig Driver, which is Cole Hausman's new model. Works really well. I love it. I think for those waves, especially with the amount of power we see over there, in the Central American Pacific is going to be awesome. Potentially might bring the sub driver or the driver 3.0, depending on how big the swell looks towards the end of the period, just knowing that there is potential for something a little bit bigger. But dude, that psychological aspect of things makes a big difference because I don't know if you saw Cote's post the other day, but Chris had a question open to the public and he's like, what do you do if you're in a route or in a route just with your surfing? And I actually wrote to him, I was like, dude, best advice I could give somebody, because I've been there many times before, ride a little bit of a different board, something you're going to catch waves on, and just try to go as fast as possible without even turning. Like, make sure that you're still enjoying it, because as soon as you get into that mindset of just having to surf a certain way the entire time, especially when the waves are horrible, it takes the fun out of it, dude.
Yeah, I think that's such good advice and something that I think most surfers know, but we love to forget. I think especially if you're like digesting like elite CT webcast content or high level free surfing, you're like, all right, well, I got to like come off the bottom and blow the lip apart like right away. And it's like you forgetting the first step of like entry speed and building your speed up. And I mean, it is one of those things we all love to fantasize that like, my turn looked like this and I'm physically capable of doing those things. But there's so much that goes into the men and women on the CT, like how good they are, how fit they are. And so much goes kind of unsaid and underappreciated in like how they're able to just drop in and come off the bottom and hammer the lip. They're generating all that speed. And so I think it's such good guidance where it's like, man, I don't know what's going on with my surfing. It's like, hey, just even middle of the session, just take a break, stand up, just build speed 100%. And get to the end, like no turning, just feel that board out. And then you'll start to layer those turns back in. So, that's it. That's it for the Vissla CT Shaper Rankings segment. We're going to take one more quick break to get a word in from our sponsors. And when we come back, we're going to talk some fantasy and talk some listener questions. Don't go anywhere.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Lineup Podcast. I'm your part-time co-host, Mitchell Salazar, here with the great Dave Prodan. Let's talk fantasy. This year, the Lineup Pod is running a CT fantasy contest. We'll be playing all season long and awarding the overall top 3 fantasy winners at the end of the season with gift cards to the WSL store valuing $50 to $150. Update on the fantasy rankings after the male Rip Pro Portugal presented by Corona Cero. Lineup Fantasy Mega League Top 5. The rankings, Dave. Number 1, 570, 16 points. Dagger Brothers Surf Team. Congratulations to them. Number 2 is just Jacob with a K. 562, 18. Railboggers coming in at number 3 with 560, 87. HP at number 4. 560, 23. Close between 3 and 4 right there. And Georgiana Sunshine, 556, 78. at number 5, Dave. But the overall rankings after Portugal, we still got our boy Surf Dog up there, number 1, 1561.23. Mateus Guilherme MG at number 2, 1557.84. And JS1 at number 3, 1540.58. We are way off of the mark, Dave. Way off of the mark with our teams, it seems.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm looking at my team now. Oh, where'd it go? Sorry. Oh, okay. Yeah, I am ranked 376th in the league overall.
In our league?
Yeah, in our league.
Okay.
And so that's like top 45%. So doing all right. Event, I did okay this event. I did bad in Abu Dhabi. So I got 161 for this event. And that means I'm top 20%. So that's pretty good. That's not too bad.
Top 20% within our league, or just worldwide?
For the league. No. We don't care about the
worldwide. Damn,
we only care about the league, man. I'm gonna run you through my women's team, and then you run me through yours, and we'll talk about that, and then we'll maybe go through the men's team. So, women's team in Portugal for me, tier A, I went with Katie Simmers. Feel like that was almost like an unimpeachable choice. I also went with her as my power surfer. She made it to the quarterfinals. Good result generally, but maybe not that good for her compared to like what she's been doing. Tier B is where I really made some headway. I had both finalists. I went with Caroline Marks and Gabriella Bryan, so they definitely performed for me. And then in Tier C, I went with Joanne Defay. She's done well in Europe before. She made the quarterfinals this year, so all pretty good performers for me on the women's side. Mitch, your thoughts?
Well, this is embarrassing, and I should probably get fired after saying this. I did not set my women's team for this event because I took somebody's advice, which was pretty golden advice, really. I was just about to set my team before the round of 16. It was the day where we had overlapping heats. There was a lot going on, and I forgot to do it. And halfway through the first heat that I was working, I realized that I hadn't set my fantasy team. So I get 0 points on the women's side. That brings my ranking within the lineup podcast Mega League at 749. But on the men's side, I did quite well. I had both men's finalists. Really stoked on that. I had Italo as my power surfer, which is great. He posted a lot of great scores. I had Canoa on there just because he was in the tier A. This is a place where he has a house. He lives here a good amount of the year, knows this location well. I had Alkin Jr., expected Jr. to do better than he did. Yago, Griff, who I know was, I think, number 3 in terms of selection worldwide for this event. He posted good numbers, so at least the points that he gave me weren't horrible. But most people were expecting him, including myself, to do way better. Let's see who else. Phil, quarterfinals. It's good, but by his standards, still looking for a victory this year. I had Crosby. He made it into the semis last year. I thought he surfed great the opening round and just, didn't really have the waves in his round of 32 heat. And Imai, who I'm good friends with, and I still feel like he has a lot more to give. And we haven't even scratched the surface with what he's capable of on a surfboard in a CT jersey. But overall, Dave, not a bad event. 749 within our league right now. I'm stoked. What about yourself on the men's side?
Yeah, I thought those were great picks and pretty similar. I went with Italo in Tier A as my power surfer. I actually had Canoa on there because of exactly what you said. He's essentially a Portuguese citizen. He might actually literally be one. I'm not sure. We love that new board spice that we see in surfers. And then right before the event started, I was like, it's hard for me to say no to Ethan Ewing because everyone loves Ethan Ewing pretty much anywhere. But I think we love to focus on him as like this god tier point break surfer, which he is. But in terms of really short, sharp, punchy beach breaks, like he grew up and lives at North Stradbroke Island. Like that's his bread and butter. So I just kind of thought he'd be sneaky good out there, and he did well. Like he made it to the semifinals. I went with Felipe Toledo in Tier B. Went with eventual winner Iago Dora as well. I too had Griffin Colapinto. First, I can't remember who I had. I think it was maybe Ramsey in the opening round, and then I pulled him and put Zhao Xianca in there, former event winner. Didn't work out. I got 0 points from Zhao because I didn't get to collect his opening round stuff. And then in Tier C, I went with Crosby. Same reason. Like, I thought he did all right, just kind of got knocked in pretty ugly conditions. And then I went with Samuel Pupo because I kind of felt similarly that he could do some damage. And
you got the two guys that lost when it turned, and the win's just weird.
I feel pretty good about my picks. That means, like, by the laws of Dave, like, my next event will be horrible, but we'll see how it goes. Like, did all right. I'm gunning to do better in the next one.
Yeah, and I saw Sam right after that happened. He was the last person to surf, right? He actually lost to Yago in that heat, and he was so bummed. And you just gotta like tell him to keep his head up high. The sun is eventually going to shine on him, and it's just a bad string of results right there for him. But it almost feels like the universe is not letting you do anything you want to do within like a certain short period of time. Where you have those 30 minutes, it's okay. Like, these waves just aren't appearing the way I need them to appear right now. And I think the same thing could be said for a lot of those people that get stuck in that rut wanting to breach the top 5, and Yago's one of them. Because for years we've been able to say that he's one of the most gifted and talented surfers on the actual championship tour. And outside of that victory in Brazil, he's at a couple of finals last year, but he was the last person to make the cut. Yeah. And now look at him, just out of top 5 qualification a couple of years in a row. And I think we're eventually going to see him qualify for the finals this year, which I'm really hoping it happens over there in Fiji. So could be sick. Just want to let everybody know we got a lot of exclusive gear over in the store, exclusive Yetis, WSL gear, signed jerseys, other cool merch. Be sure to set your teams like I, of course, did for this event, including my women's team that stood out so well, pun intended. But
set them now. Set them right now that you're listening to this. Pause the podcast and go set them.
And also, if you can set a reminder, just make yourself, hey, like the day before the comp, okay, set up your fantasy league. Simple as that. And check out today's episodes for a lot more details and kind of interesting stuff heading into El Salvador. And let's focus on that real quick, Dave, if you don't mind. Just a couple of quick minutes. Picks for Punta Roca, given past experiences, rookies on tour. Who are we looking at?
Oh, man. Like, it's a good question. As we talked about, the forecast, knock on wood, looks pretty decent at this point. It looks head high. Looks like the winds are good. It's a world-class point break when it's on, which I kind of think is like a big leveler for both the men's and women's CT fields. Like, every single one of these surfers can go out on a point break, forehand, backhand, and perform really well. On the men's side, as I mentioned, I think I'll keep an eye on Ethan Ewing. I like Leonardo Fioravanti as well. Like, I think he's such a good point break surfer. Will this be the event that Felipe Toledo kind of breaks out and gets a result to come back? I love the way Liam O'Brien surfs there. And as far as the rookies go, like, I'm interested in George Pitar. Like, I think he's been on our radar for a couple of years, Challenger Series. I think he's composed himself really well throughout the season so far. So keep an eye on him. And then on the women's side, I'll probably gravitate back towards, Katie Simmers. Like, I think the line she's able to draw on, especially with those huge figure 8 cutbacks, not just the maneuver in itself, but the way it sets up the pacing for her on the wave and sets her up for a combination of maneuvers. I'm interested in that. Gabby Bryan, such a power surfer. Love seeing her on her forehand. And then with Caroline Marks coming off of a win and just how good of a backhand surfer she is as well, like, I'll probably be taking a look there too. But Mitch, you've got a lot of experience at this particular wave. You've been in the trenches more so than I have this year on tour. What are you thinking for El Salvador?
Well, those are excellent picks, especially the two women's right at the end, the two women that you mentioned, Gabby and Caroline. That was the final last year. They're coming off of the final right here in Portugal. I love Gabby's style at that point break wave. I especially think with the amount of strength that wave has, it just really adds into her power factor. Caroline, of course, is really, driven when it comes to not only using that backhand to excellent surfing. Her wave selection there is actually one of the best I've ever seen out of an outsider. So Brian Pettis, of course, could easily be a great person to pick. It's not official that he's given the wild card, but I'm pretty sure it's a guarantee that he's going to be in the event. I personally like Jordy Smith on the men's side. I think he's going to be one of those sleeper guys that's going to make it in there and be difficult to beat, especially with the forecast that we're looking at. Al Cleveland Jr. to me could be one of those guys too. Biggest win ever was right there in El Salvador, getting qualification for the Olympic Games. You speak the local language. You've been there before. He's actually already there right now. Left here early to go over there and practice. I like GP. I think that's going to be awesome. Point break style, of course. And I, for some reason, I want to go with Sori Lindblad as a sleeper pick on the women's side too. Good backhand surfing. Comes from a lot of cobblestone right-hand point breaks over there in Southern California. Lowers, uppers, church. So she's really one to keep an eye out for on the women's side for me.
Great picks. Great picks.
All right. Listener questions. Let's get into it, Dave. We do want to thank everybody for writing at the Lineup Pod. If we don't get to your question in today's episode, we'll always do our best to respond in our DMs as always. Start things off, Dave. At Noah Purington, sending in our first question, is Toledo back to 100%?
That's quite a question, right? We've talked about Felipe a little bit on this podcast. Two-time world champion. He's not having a bad season. Like, he's ninth at the moment, right? He's got a couple of ninths at Pipe, at Surf Abu Dhabi, and then a fifth place in Portugal. It's difficult. We were talking about a little bit offline too. Like, I've heard this from elite level surfers since I started, whether they're world champions or even just like free surfing icons like Dane Reynolds. And they all say a version of the same thing, is that being on tour, competing on the CT, free surfing around CT surfers, it keeps your surfing as sharp as it ever will be. Right. And so even for like an elite level two-time world champion like Felipe, coming off a sabbatical year where every free surf session isn't with that collection of surfers, you're not stepping up and competing with that collection of surfers, it may take some time to get back into a rhythm there. And I don't think we've really seen peak Felipe back yet. So it may take, what do they say in like the NBA? Like, sometimes it's like you got to play yourself back into shape. So maybe he's going to compete himself back into kind of elite level shape. I think all of us were expecting more out of Surf Abu Dhabi, just because he's been so dominant in the wave pools in the past. But coming up on these next few events, right, we've got right-hand point break, Punta Roca in El Salvador. And then we go to Bells Beach, where he's won before. We go to Snapper Rocks, where he's won before. We go to Main Break, where he's won before. So I think these next four events will be a real litmus test of like, is Felipe Toledo 100% back? The other thing that I would encourage people to consider, Felipe's 29. That's not old by any stretch, but he qualified when he was 17, 18, right? So I think Kelly Slater has like shifted the Overton window so radically on tour, where people are like, well, if you're not on tour for 35 years, like, you're a failure. It's like, are you kidding? Like, if you're a world title contender and you've been on tour for a decade, that is exhausting. And that is a full career in and of itself. That said, I think the proof will be in the pudding in the next four events. I don't know, Mitch, what are you thinking on Felipe? Is he 100% back or what?
Well, there's a lot of highlights that you mentioned right there. Of course, the age. We got to talk about how his body's held up too. He's gone through multiple injuries. Look, I think a big part of our explanation that we try to do on the broadcast always is explain the degree of difficulty and how high performance surfing nowadays is just so dangerous, and that people's bodies just aren't designed to sustain that kind of injury and that damage, and especially the load that you have once you land in there of such a high impact, like the ones we see from Philippe, from Mitala, from Gabe, even John. I mean, that's a guy that we also lost on tour for several years due to injuries. And I think these are not only elite athletes, but world class when it comes to recognizing which waves they'll be able to allow that surfing on. And I still go back to that wave that we saw at J-Bay when Philippe won and redefined performance surfing with the two alley-oops on the one wave. To me, it's still the best wave we've ever seen in high performance surfing on the championship tour within a jersey. You know, I think he's 100%. I think psychologically he's probably still not fully there, and that probably won't happen until he actually gets his groove going with excellent heat totals. We haven't seen that yet, and I think that's why he probably still, I wouldn't say doubts himself, but he's probably in the back of his mind thinking, is this it? Like, am I doing things the way I want to do them right now? Because if you're not necessarily surfing the way you feel like your surfing should be translating to scores, then there's always that kind of thought creeping in the back of your head, like going, okay, I still have an extra gear to go to. Can I get to that gear though? And I don't know if we've seen that on the first 3 events. He's won in El Salvador before though. He's made 2 finals over there. This is his venue, and as you said, the Australian League is probably the best 3 locations on tour for him, considering that we still have J-Bay after the cut too.
I'll make a bold prediction. I say Felipe Toledo wins a CT event this year.
There's no doubt about that. It's just which one. I feel like he's winning multiple ones, and
totally. I just think when he gets one, it's like the blood gets on the fangs a little bit,
and
he'll be like, "Oh yeah, I as you point, I thought that's such a good point. Like there may be a physical component just with terms of how the body's breaking down, but like the surfing's still there. I think it's just a belief in like, okay, I can do this still.
Yeah, but you need to click into gear, right? Like it needs to happen on a consistent and regular basis, and once that happens, it's game over for everybody else, because you get out to the Oz' right waves, and especially considering that the 3 venues in Oz are so different, and he's won at all 3 of them. Yeah, like dude, he's a very complete surfer, and once again, speed is his friend, and that's what separates him from the majority of the other people.
And then think of post-cut, like Sakurama, Lowers, Jeffreys Bay. Like this guy can win in a lot of places.
No, every venue on tour after the cut is great for him. Every venue after Super Tubos is extremely good for him. So watch out for Phil. I'd be looking at him to be one of your power surfers on your fantasy team too. Our second question, at Corey James Walker: should surfers score less for trying the same air 15 times before completing it? That's actually a question that is posed quite a bit in skating too.
Yeah, it's a good question. I'll be honest, I don't feel strongly kind of either way. I guess if I was forced to choose, I would say no, they shouldn't. Like, I think every wave should be kind of tabla rasa, right? Where it's just like, yeah, if you tried it before and you didn't complete it and you tried it and you nailed it, good for you. Like it shouldn't impact the score. It's a slightly different question than should they score less if they're completing the same air over and over and over. And I think that was more of a question kind of in the late 2000s, where you started seeing surfers start to incorporate like an air reverse, right, into their wave pretty consistently. And it's like, okay, well, if you're doing it 5 times in a heat, like is the 5th time you do it score better, worse, exactly the same as the first time? It's a good question. And I think it's a good question for the judging panel too. I like the skating comp. I think the difference in skating, right, is that the ramp is static, right? You're going to draw your line in the ramp or the bowl or the whatever, and you're going to hit that same thing every single time. So if you try it 15 times and then complete it, I think that's much different than trying it 15 times in the ocean, where every wave is different and every ramp is different. So to me, I don't think they should be scored less if they try something 15 times and then finally nail it. I don't know, Mitch, what do you think?
Well, I think the perfect explanation is what I've always been told when I started judging. You score somebody based off of what they did and not what they can do. And we saw that a lot at this event. There were a lot of scores that were obviously kept down just due to the quality of the waves and how good the talent is now on the championship tour. But yeah, you shouldn't get dogged for, trying something over and over and failing. And eventually once it happens, the score is going to go down because of that. No, of course not. Like, that's the first actual complete one. And as you said, the big difference in skating, the bowl's always there, the park's always there, the wave's not. And it's usually a different section where they're attempting, just because not every wave is exactly identical. And even at the Surf Ranch, even at Surf Abu Dhabi, we saw that, there could be a little bit of varying conditions on every single wave too. And I think that's what makes surfing so different and so particular, and just keeps it exciting too.
Totally.
All right, final question for today's episode, at jhaley87. Ooh, throwing a curveball right here, a little Randy Johnson curveball. Ethan has amazing power and flow. Are aerials keeping him from a title? Off-season focus.
I'm more interested in your take on this, but I'll try. Okay, well, I'll take it in reverse. Should this be an off-season focus? I think if you followed Ethan around, he's a pretty private dude, but like I would imagine that if you followed him around in the off season and saw what kind of surfing he did, there's plenty of airs mixed in with where he surfs. I think we talked about a little bit like North Stradbroke Island, world-class beach breaks, like great ramps, great turn sections, great air sections. So yeah, I would imagine that the truth is actually he's quite competent at airs, and we've seen him do airs like in events, and we've seen him do them in free surfs as well. I don't think they're keeping him from the title, mostly because I think he's proven that the way he surfs, even at venues like a lower trestles, even at venues like Surf Ranch, even at or Surf Abu Dhabi, even at venues like Point Breaks, where you would see aerial-based surfers use that weapon to get scores, he's very capable of getting excellent scores, just the way he surfs. And that's not to say that he doesn't have a huge progressive element to his power and flow. I think he's one of the fastest surfers on tour. I think his rail game is excellent. I think he is like a new level when you look at the way maybe a Mick Fanning or a Joel Parkinson, who also had like beautiful rail-based approaches back in the late 2000s, surfed. I think Ethan has that same approach, but I think he's taken it a step further where he has incorporated like big fin drifts and big progressive elements to his comprehensive approach. But yeah, I guess it's almost, this is kind of where I want to get your take, Mitch, is like, I've noticed it forever where if you do want to do one big aerial on a section, your approach to the wave and your stance and everything you're doing is a lot different than if you're trying to maybe do two huge maneuvers in a section. And so I think it just has to come down to an approach. I think if he focused strictly on airs, his stance would look different and you'd miss out on some of those other awesome weapons that he has in his arsenal. So I don't know. I have no criticism for the way he approaches wave riding and the balance that he puts into his waves. But what's your take on that, Mitch?
Look, I just want to give props to our listener that sent in that question at jhaley87. It's a question that comes up quite often and a lot. And, I think to really dig into a specific answer, I'll go back to the last two versions of the WSL finals. How did Philippe beat Ethan in that opening match? He had to be different than Ethan. He couldn't match him power for power, and he knew that on a big set wave, combining his maneuvers with his progressive ability was one of the key factors to defeat Ethan Ewing.
Right.
Because up until that point, Ethan had just trailblazed through everybody, And then last year, you have Italo in smaller conditions, just defeating everybody with more progressive aspect of things. And then he matches up against John Florence in the actual final matches. And the way John beats him is with something completely different as well, but it's fully engaged in the rail and with power. So I just think the creativity aspect is the most important part of it. It doesn't necessarily have to be in the air, though. And I think even Iago's a good example of that, because Iago's so great in the air and so different in the air, but he's also amazing on rail. And if you saw a lot of the maneuvers he did at this event, those laybacks weren't necessarily a maneuver that everybody else was doing. So there needs to be able to be a point of separation for you to be different than everybody else. The worst part about being on this championship tour is wanting to be somebody that you're not. And if you're just trying to compare yourself to everybody else the way they are, then it doesn't mean you're unique. To be a world champion, you have to be unique in a certain way.
Yeah. No, I think it's a great note. And I mean, we'll see something as it kind of plays out over the course of the next few events. Like, I think that just like Felipe Toledo, who is also an elite level surfer in right hand point breaks, like, he just has a slightly different approach, and we'll see kind of which one bears out, conditions willing, over the next few events. But really appreciate the listener questions. If we didn't get to your questions at the Lineup Pod on Instagram, we will hit you up in the DMs. Please keep sending those comments and questions. We love talking to you. And Mitch, thank you so much. Thank you so much for the work on the ground in Portugal. Safe travels back to the US and safe travels back to Punta Roca. I think you and I will be speaking really soon.
Yeah, I hope so, Dave. And looking like the swell's going to be on offer over there in Central America. Tune in to the Surf State of Salvador Pro starting on April 2nd, live on WorldSurfLeague.com.